board meetings. And again, I want to thank the San Diego County Water Authority for helping us with this location and helping to underwrite today's lunch program. But we at the Water Coalition love to say we meet quarterly, and we like to do centrally located meetings that are convenient to absolutely nobody to get here. So for those of you that endured the travels to get here, we thank you for making the travels. We did have a couple of folks that came from the San Joaquin Valley. Anybody travel further than the San Joaquin Valley today to get here? Well, you have the Coachella Valley. Imperial, you're close. Imperial's close, Jeff, you guys. So thank you for coming in and being part of it. I will say earlier today we did do a board meeting. We do this on a quarterly basis. And what I wanted to be able to share with you, because it pertains to what we're about to do here for our lunch program. At the Southern California Water Coalition, we like to use the phrase, we educate to advocate. That primarily we're an educational nonprofit, and that if you have the information that you need to make an informed choice, then you will advocate in your own self-interest. And so to do that, we shared with our board today the continued growth and success in our educational programming, specifically with our communications and outreach. And so we shared with the group today the combination of the California Water Magazine that was just published in the Inland Empire and Orange County. We talked about the new vodcasts that we have up that just went up Tuesday with Secretary of Natural Resources Wade Crowfoot, and with our social media reach. And so to that, how many of you here today are on some form of social media? Please raise your hands. Yes, Ms. Fromm, that means you. Everybody's on social media of some kind? Oh, come on, everybody's got to be on some kind of social media. Okay, so here's your challenge right now before we begin today's conversation. Pull out your phones. Take the social media of your choice. See, we're everywhere, so you can take the social media of your choice. And we need you to say something. We need you to check today's event. We need you to heckle our panel, make fun of me, whatever it takes. That's good. We like it when you do that. So please, flag us on your social media today. That's a big part of what we try to do in expanding our network and helping bring important information to all of you. So to that, a year ago, we started the conversation about the Colorado River. Colorado River, we've never worried about the Colorado. We have a task force in Colorado. At the time, Sandy said she'd be the chair of the Colorado River Task Force, and I promised her there'd be nothing for you to ever have to do. And then she changed the dynamic. So we're blaming Sandy now for what's happening on the Colorado. And when she's not here to defend herself, that's the best time to blame somebody for something. So we did a program a little over a year ago. Things started, things were serious, droughts, flows, and things got more serious. And so as part of our discussion, we thought, okay, this is now something that we went from relatively inactive for a long time to, hey, we better hop on this thing, we better stay on it and stay on it for some time into the future. So today, we have the second in the iteration of our programs around the Colorado, and to do that are the folks that are the leaders for our respective agencies and really representing the state of California in making the case. And they're going to share with us what it is that's going on currently. And while there may be reading in the funny papers about agreements and about things seem copacetic, we're really going to talk about what is it that the real heavy lifting and the work that needs to be done in the very short term, which brings me back to educating all of you so that you may advocate in your own self-interest on behalf of your agencies in Southern California going forward. So to help us do that, we have the newly minted General Manager, as he shared with you, from the San Diego County Water Authority, Mr. Denham. We have from the Coachella Valley Water District, Robert Cheng. From the incomparable Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, Bill Hasencamp, a household name for those of you in Colorado. And from the Imperial Irrigation District, Tina Shields. And Dan is going to facilitate today's conversation. We're going to let him take it through. I've told these folks, again, have your cameras out. If blood is spilled, that's good social media. And without blood, okay, you guys will still have a long drive home. So thank you for being with us. Mr. Denham, would you like to kick us off? And then we'll go through with opening statements, and then we'll mix it up. Ladies and gentlemen, the Colorado River.
Check. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to move this table up because Robert and I are dangerously close to falling through the window. All right. So again, thank you all for being here. Like I said, a lot of interesting conversations that we're about to have here. I want to say that it's interesting that in 3 months' time we're going to be at the 20-year anniversary of the USA. We talked a lot about, or I talked a lot about partnerships going into this day, and certainly what I would hope to do as the new general manager of the San Diego County Water Authority. The QSA, despite the awkward name, it's really a combination of contracts that are all interrelated that have allowed us to use water better in Southern California. It's the entitlement holders that you see here at the table with me, and then there's the one-off agency that is the San Diego County Water Authority. And we certainly have a unique role in that with the 280,000 acre feet worth of water that we have coming out of the QSA. The transfer agreement and transfers in general through the QSA, I think that they've been a game changer, and I think that certainly they're a model for what some of our friends in the lower basin should and can be doing as we enter into this next round of talks on the river. The transfers, for those of you who aren't quite familiar with it, there's a physical transfer of water in some cases, like between IID and Metropolitan through the Colorado River Aqueduct, and there's a virtual transfer at times, like what we have, the San Diego County Water Authority with the Imperial Irrigation District, more of the paper water transfer. I really do think that is the model going forward for not just Southern California, but for other states. Other entities looking to be more transactional with water, sharing water, finding ways to look at the systems, the contracts that you have, and work through them. I think looking forward, climate change is going to be a big deal. It obviously is. The world's changing around us. It's hard to imagine this time last year in 2022 having the conversation that we're about to have here on this panel. Think about what we were talking about. We were talking about water rights. We were talking about health and human safety. We were talking about whether or not alfalfa should be grown in the Imperial Valley, whether microchips should be made on the coast. All of those conversations have somewhat been put on pause. And they've been put on pause because of 31 atmospheric rivers that we all experience. We do have an opportunity because of that to do things a little bit differently. It did give us an opportunity to talk more. Lake Powell is going to be 50 feet higher than we anticipated this time last year, and we're going to be in probably a tier 1 shortage instead of flirting with a tier 3 shortage on the river. So I think that kind of sets the context for what we're about to talk about, this watershed moment as the program is titled here. And so let's get started. I'm going to give deference to my fellow Padre fan on the panel here, Ms. Tina Shields. Why don't you start us off?
Well, I'm just going to introduce myself quickly because Dion's already messing with the order and catching us off guard. So I'm Tina Shields. I'm one of the water managers in Imperial Irrigation District. If you have really hard questions, ask the other water manager, Mike Pacheco, or our board vice president, J.B. Hamby. But I have a lot of background in the water transfers and the QSAs, having been at the district over 30 years. So I will jump in. Bill's going to lead us off and defer for once to Metropolitan.
Thank you for knocking Tina off guard, Dan. That was a good start. We're a bit in a state of schizophrenia on the Colorado River at the moment. And it's not for looking to see who's sitting at the IID table. It's because at the moment we're working both on a short-term plan for the Colorado River and a long-term plan at the exact same time. We're working on a supplemental EIS with new rules that will govern the operations of the river for the next 3 years. and at the same time working on an EIS that will govern the rules for the next 20 years. And as we've gone through this process and talking about the atmosphere of rivers that Dan mentioned, nobody thinks we need to do the short-term process anymore. Yet we're stuck doing it. Nobody except for maybe Rich Nagel. I think he thinks we need to go through it. And the Bureau of Reclamation also thinks. So we have to go through the short-term process to get through the next few years while we're focusing on the long-term. The long-term process is started last month with the notice of preparation for an EIS. Scoping comments are due next month, August 15th, and we need to have a 7-state alternative completed by next spring or summer. If the 7 states can come to an agreement, we have a little less than a year to do that. For us in California, we know what's on the table. Earlier this year, the 6 states put together a proposal targeting California's senior water right priority. In the 1960s, California went back to lobby Congress to get California the highest right in the lower basin. And the 6 states sent a proposal in January, completely ignoring that right and saying everyone cuts equally, whatever the existing law says don't matter. So we know that we have our work cut out for us in protecting our senior right. But that doesn't mean that we're not going to have to participate in reductions. Many people in Arizona mistakenly say, well, protecting California's senior right means CAP goes to 0 before California takes a shortage, before California cuts a drop of water. But that's not the case. If you look at the last 20 years, not only did California reduce its use, as Dan said, to 4.4 million acre feet, but we added millions of acre feet of additional water into Lake Mead. Millions of acre feet of water in the last 20 years from California. From the reduced demands in Coachella, INE, San Diego, Met, all contributed. But we did it with incentives. For the ag agencies, they got paid through system conservation agreements to leave water in Lake Mead. For Metropolitan, we got the ability to store water in wet years on the State Water Project and fill our aqueduct in dry years. So in exchange for that, there's a system tax, so the system benefits. So the other states benefit, but we also benefit. So we know that going through this next process, we're going to have to come up and give up water again as a state. And each agency is going to have to figure out what's in it for them. What do we want in order to give up some water? What do we want in exchange for doing that? So that's where we're headed, and we have 1 year to come up with a 7-state plan, and then another year to have to negotiate it. So really 2.5 to 3 years to have all the agreements signed by all of our boards. So buckle up, because it's going to be a wild ride.
And I didn't mean to throw you, Bill, by going out of order, but I thought, well, why not? So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the near-term process we've been in, which is the how do we get to 2026 without falling off a cliff? And this was really the issue that we saw last summer when Commissioner Tootin did her testimony before Congress and said, hey everyone, we just need 2 to 4 million acre feet reductions, and can you figure it out in the next 2 months and get back to me? Obviously that did not go well, and just really highlighted the tensions that we have on the Colorado River when we're in drought circumstances. So through that process, when the states did not respond with an immediate consensus plan, which frankly was an impossible task, the reclamation started its supplemental environmental impact statement process, because they said, if you guys can't figure it out, then we'll do this the hard way, which is regulatory action. We went through a process for scoping. We ended up with a 6-state plan versus a California plan. And you know, that is an easy target when California is out there by itself. But the problem was the California plan was realistic and implementable, and the 6-state plan was pretty much do everything and use California's water to solve the problem. So obviously we weren't going to stand for that. California here came out at the end of last year with a proposal and said, hey, we understand the significance of the drought, we want to be part of the solution, so we will agree through a voluntary compensated program to come up with 400,000 acre feet of additional conservation through this 4-year plan, because we need to stop fighting about what's going to happen right now and we need to focus on the future. So through that process, we had idealistic hopes, I guess, that the rest of the basin would follow through and they would offer up their own voluntary plan, and we were met with a lot of radio silence. So it ended up in a position earlier this year where we were competing California versus the other 6 states, and then we had this wonderful benefit of atmospheric rivers and snowpacks, and we saw huge increases in the reservoir elevation, so we no longer had to talk about near-term disaster. We could spend our time and our efforts on what might that long-term plan be and not fight in the process. So when Reclamation came out with its draft SEIS, they were a little bit smart about it. They came out with 2 alternatives, and depending on who you were and what your water rights were, they were equally offensive to everybody. So if you pick one, this group loved it and this group hated it, and if you pick the other, it was kind of a role reversal. But between having a proposal that was equally offensive to all agencies, depending on what the ultimate preferred alternative would be, and having the benefit of water in the system and a decent winter, it took the pressure off and allowed the lower basin states to put together a voluntary consensus approval. Oh yeah, and it really helps that Congress approved $4 billion in IRA funding, because it's a lot easier to solve problems when you have funding. And the interesting thing was the lower basin proposal looked a lot like the California proposal, but don't tell the other states, because that means they might not buy on. So we're in the process right now, having submitted the proposal. California has proposed through this process to put up to 1.6 million acre feet over the next 3 to 4 years in the system through reductions or voluntary compensated conservation. A piece of that pie is an additional 250,000. So that's going to be a really tough charge for our district, because we're already conserving 500,000 acre feet a year, and if you layer that additional 250,000 acre feet on top, that's 24% of our water supply. So we're still working with our growers to develop plans. We're working on a funding contract with Reclamation, but we do anticipate we'll probably have to do the nasty F word, which is fallowing, and a few others in Imperial Valley. We're trying to draft some plans that can accelerate and expand our on-farm conservation, but 750,000 acre feet of water a year frankly can't be done through efficiency conservation alone. So our growers have been super supportive. We're working on some deficit irrigation programs and any creative ways to at least minimize the amount of fallowing. And again, we have other challenges in Imperial Valley in addition to the 117-degree heat we came from today. We have the Salton Sea, which as we do good things in ag water use efficiencies and support the river, that water is all coming out of the Salton Sea. So we've got about 30,000 acres of exposed playa, we have public health issues, we have critter issues and biological environmental issues, but the federal government was very understanding of our situation, and Commissioner Tootin in particular addressed a long-standing concern we had about the lack of federal involvement. And last year, before all of these proposals came to be, we signed a commitment letter between the state of California and federal agencies and Coachella and IID. And of that $4 billion in IRA funding, $250 million was designated to help the state accelerate their efforts to address the dust and the playa exposure that our additional conservation will incur on our community. So that's extremely helpful and helps us get to that point where we're not in court fighting over what happens between now and 2026, but lets us focus on the future and the longer term problems and solutions. Robert?
Thanks, Tina. So good afternoon, everybody. I'm Robert Cheng. I'm the Assistant General Manager at Coachella Valley Water District, and we're probably a little less visible than Metropolitan and IED, but sometimes that's a good thing, because it allows you to make certain decisions without the white hot spotlight of the media. So, as was said in the introductory remarks, I think I harken back to the good old days when the Colorado River was not a topic of discussion. And I've been just working on this issue relatively, for a short amount of time. I've only been at Coachella for about 10 years, and when I got there, I didn't really know much about the state water project system or the Colorado River. And now thinking back, how blissful that period was. And I've actually had the great benefit of what Dan said, of having good friends in Tina and Bill to kind of help educate me along. And, you know, sometimes we don't completely agree, but I think for the most part, we can arrive at the same conclusion for the benefit of the state. So as we were enjoying our lunch today, you know, we started off with some nice mixed greens, and then I saw, you know, we had some carrots and Brussels sprouts. I would say that, you know, most of those crops were probably raised in Southern California. And I think one of the reasons why we're able to enjoy these produce at a relatively modest cost is because of our relatively high priority system. It used to be where, you know, you look at the hydrology, like on the state water project system, and that was completely variable, especially after 2007. So Coachella shares the same water sources as Metropolitan, so we're also a state water project contractor. And we always were able to kind of count on the Colorado as our stable source of supply. However, I think, you know, as we kind of talked about, you know, that reliability has really been, you know, kind of called in question, especially with the actions that's been kind of been taken and the words that have been put out in the media in the last, I say the rhetoric has really intensified in the last 12 months. So I was really happy to have, you know, the last 9 years to kind of come up on the learning curve, because I couldn't imagine jumping in right now, not knowing anything, and understanding the players and the different positions. So I think one of the elephants in the room is the priority system. And, you know, in California, there's, you know, a handful of contractors, and we're third in line, Coachella is. We have 330,000 acre feet of base allocation, and then through our friends at ID, we're getting another 103,000. So it's a big commitment that was made back in the quantification settlement agreement. And again, as was alluded to by a previous speaker, you know, this kind of cooperation needs to be enacted in other states in the lower basin to make things happen. So as much as we like to rest upon our laurels, the priority system kind of giving us, you know, our 4.4 million acre feet year in and year out, I think, you know, the actions and the rhetoric, you know, from the other states kind of really have shaken that foundational belief. So even though I think headed into the post-2026 discussions, we're going to be fighting like crazy for our priority system rights, I think, you know, as was mentioned before, it is not unrealistic and unreasonable to expect, you know, some discussions about reductions, you know, within the state. So I think, you know, these are hard conversations that, you know, for all of the boards, and I see a lot of board members in here, so hopefully you understand what I'm talking about. You know, to have that conversation, hey, you know, the water rights that we've been enjoying for so many decades, that we built our economy on, is no longer as bedrock foundational as we think it is. So how do we do that? So I think these last, I would say, 6, 7, 8 months have been a good test. So what do I mean by that? I think Tina kind of talked about the system conservation efforts that was funded by various sources, federal sources. I think, you know, one was the bipartisan infrastructure law, and then more recently is the Inflation Reduction Act funding, which I think was highly publicized, and about $4 billion in both short and long-term measures. So I think Coachella, although, you know, we rely on the priority system, we also realize that, you know, this presents a tremendous opportunity, you know, for us to kind of show some leadership. And so under the short-term funding, which is what they call bucket 1A and 1B, that was released last November, we submitted 2 proposals to voluntarily leave water, compensated, of course, voluntary, and non-presidential, to leave, you know, more than our 7% of the California entitlement on the table in proportion to, I think, what Bill and Tina talked about. So I'm happy to report that sometimes the federal process is not the swiftest, and I believe that we were the first California agency to have an executed agreement, which we submitted back in November. So I just literally got the executed copy on my desk yesterday. And so I think there's a lot more to come there. But in terms of volumes, we're conserving 35,000 acre feet a year off that contract. So it may not sound like a huge number, but when you look at elevations in Lake Mead, that's about half a foot. So it is every little bit helps. We're also put in our proposal for some other conservation efforts longer term. I think our valley is sort of unique in the ag community in the fact that all our canals are lined. So we did that decades ago. So I think we quantified the savings to be in the hundreds of thousands of acre feet a year, through the provincial losses. And then I think for agricultural side, 60%, 60, are on drip irrigation. So I think we've actually exhausted most of the efficiencies that we can, and then plus our system is all metered. So we have the ability to track everybody's usages, all 400 plus customers. So I think these are just some examples that we would like to highlight of what we've done. I know there's more work to be done, I think, on the golf courses. I think we're trying to encourage some additional conservation. So, those are the long-term measures that we're sort of looking at. So with that, Dan, I don't know.
Yeah, it's not working. All right, so I guess I want to first throw out the following. We often are concerned or interested about seats at the table, seats at the negotiating table. I haven't heard anyone mention Mexico yet, or the tribes, or NGOs. It seems that there's a lot of opportunity out there with Mexico's Colorado River water and their apportionment. Can you guys talk about what those conversations have looked like with Mexico, the tribes, and NGOs, and where they're at in the grand scheme of things?
Good at filling silence. So I think Mexico's been a really good partner. It's a very separate process from our normal working within California, the lower basin, and growing that to upper basin. But they've been good partners to date. I think there's a lot of challenges in communicating with Mexico. I don't think they have the best system of trust to our numbers and are very skeptical because obviously they don't want to take any reductions unless they really have to. So a lot of, I think, what's been happening lately is educational efforts, but they've been very good partners through the various minutes, minute 318, 323, they've taken their equivalent share of reductions. I think in the near term it's going to be challenging, and certainly they have the same funding challenges that we do within the United States, but maybe not the funding sources unless there is federal monies available. I will say more recently, we've had some discussions starting to restart. Mexico had an interest from a decade ago when they had a really big earthquake down there about installing a binational turnout at the end of the All-American Canal. So those discussions are restarting again. They have concerns from an emergency perspective. They have concerns from an O&M perspective, and I think they have some challenges in Tijuana that they're looking to address as well. So we have more direct involvement on those type of local level negotiations than from a broader scale. But my understanding of how that process is working is, again, they're at the table, they want to be partners, they understand it's a shared river system. It's just getting to the point of having them understand how they can be helpful, and that is probably a post-2026 discussion.
One of the rules on the Colorado River that we say is everybody likes a small group until you realize you're not in that group. On the Colorado River, the states are the ones that entered into the compact and dictate how the river is operated. Reclamation came in after the Arizona decree to be the water master in the lower basin, but it's still a basin that's led by consensus of the 7 states. Each state has one principal representative that's appointed by their respective governors. In California, it's the chair of the Colorado River Board of California. We're fortunate to have one of those 7 principals in the room today at the IID table, J.B. Hamby, who's representing California. California is a little different though, in that in California, it's the water right contractors that have the final say in the agreements that are reached. All of the other states, the principal generally can dictate the water rights in those states. In California, it's a little different. It's the Section 5 contractors that ultimately need to approve all of the agreements. That's the ag agencies, along with Metropolitan, are the Section 5 contractors. Getting broader input is something that has been always a challenge. And there's the trade-off between we have to quickly enter into an agreement, so we've got a 7-state alternative in less than a year, and wanting to get input. Recently, the Quatsan tribe joined the Colorado River Board of California, and they are participating in the Colorado River Board discussions. And there's also someone from Audubon Society that was appointed by the governor to the River Board. So they can all provide direction to Chair Hamby, but all of us are still struggling of how we get enough input and still make the timely decisions that need to be made.
And I guess my comments, as a relatively new observer of the process and participant, I think that there's a sequencing issue. And Dan, I think you asked a good question about Mexico. They have to absolutely be part of the conversation. However, I think at this stage in the game, Interior needs to talk to the State Department on how that sequencing looks like. Right now I think we're still kind of formulating thoughts within California, and then subsequently with the lower basin states, our partners in Arizona and Nevada, and then you've got the discussions with the upper basin, and, so you get some sort of uniform or consensus view before you can shop the ideas to Mexico. So these are not easy discussions to have. And then I think the last thing is, it feels like the tribes are indeed in the room to a greater degree than they have been in the past.
Okay. Sorry. I want to go back to the Salton Sea, Tina. And, we're the Water Authority, CVWD, and IID are part of a joint power authority that have been together since the beginning of the QSA. We ran into problems over time with funding larger restoration efforts. We certainly, we have done our part, I believe, with mitigating some of the impacts of the water transfers. But moving forward, any drop of water that comes out of the Imperial and Coachella valleys for this new plan going forward is going to have an impact on the Salton Sea. Do you feel, Tina and Robert, that the $250 million is enough? Can it make a material difference right now? Or what else is needed based on what you've seen so far?
So it's super challenging with the Salton Sea, and when you think about an additional 250,000 acre feet, that's actually bigger than the San Diego transfer. So huge volumes that will be very impactful on the playa. But on the other side of the coin, we have long-term transfers that are in place, and really what we're talking about is 3 to 4 years. So when you look at the numbers and you do the analysis, you see over the near term, 750,000 acre feet to 1 million acre feet will expose at its peak about 8,000 acres of additional playa that needs to have dust control and habitat projects placed on it. However, if you look farther out, that number goes down, and it's really only about 600 to 800 acres of new playa, because these transfers with San Diego are extended through at least 2047. So that playa will be exposed anyways, just a little bit later on. The other interesting thing about the sea is most of the playa exposure is on the south end in Imperial County because it's very shallow there. So you take a little bit of water and you see a very large exposure. But as that shoreline recedes and you start to hit the deeper elevations, and deep's relative here, right? You don't see near the volume. So I feel like the $250 million is, first of all, a huge investment by the feds, because they've given nothing, they'll disagree with that. They've given money for studies and minor projects at the end of the year when the budget's running out, but they've never done a significant investment. And it was particularly timely this year, although the cash hasn't changed hands yet, because the state ran into some budget problems and, of course, chalked salt and seed funding. So I do think that that funding will be significant. I also think that success breeds success, and if the state can take these funds and show how much they accomplished and the good that it did in that area, it bodes well for future funding and future partnerships with the Salton Sea.
So for the Salton Sea, and that's an interesting decades-long issue. So I think more recently, with federal involvement in this, because they see this as being a critical piece of the contributions for water savings for the California agencies. I'm really happy to see the federal government kind of stepping in and then also bringing along the state. I think for decades, since the signing of the QSA, we recognize that the state has a huge role to play in this, but they haven't necessarily, perhaps been as, have a seat at the table or taken the actions in the manner that we hope they would. I think this last round of crisis that was talked about, since Commissioner Tuden's call last June in her testimony, really kind of lit a fire, and I think that's where the $250 million came from. I can't speak to whether that's sufficient or not. I think my colleague down at the other end of the table has a much better pulse on it. But Coachella was part of that agreement that was supportive, and will provide I think some in kind in terms of right of ways and maybe some unrestricted flows of ag drain water as it is available to the effort. So I think we are hopefully we signal our support for these efforts as being an important part of the solution.
So the next one I want to start with Bill, and it has to do with Arizona. You've been across the table from our colleagues in Arizona for a number of years. I think we've all joked around that it's time that Arizona does its own QSA. I'm wondering if you can speak to that and speak to the fact that that state is sitting on a really significant groundwater mound that it has in reserve for emergencies. They are a significant player in everything going forward. What do you think the tone and the tenor of negotiations right now with Arizona are, and how do we get past any stumbling blocks we have?
There's a lot in that statement. In my first 15 to 20 years working on the Colorado River, there was a partnership between Metropolitan Water District, Southern Nevada Water Authority, and Central Arizona Project, and the Bureau of Reclamation to fund projects to add water to Lake Mead. We provide millions of dollars, and that millions of dollars generated a graphic that was 65 feet of water in Lake Mead because of the collective actions. Starting last year, that chart disappeared, and every state was saying why their state was so much better than anyone else, and why California needs to do more. And the partnership that we had eroded overnight. And it was the upper basin now partnering with Arizona and Nevada against California, and it was really a wake-up call that we had been working cooperatively, and then in a heartbeat, we were on opposite ends in this SEIS process. Today, now we're working again cooperatively with the lower basin. California, Arizona, Nevada are working together. They developed a lower basin proposal. But fool me once, shame on you. We have to realize that at the end of the day, they have their own interest, and their interest is having California take increased reductions. They do have about 5 million acre feet stored in the groundwater basin. The principal reason why they stored that water was so that California would have to come back, cut back. Part of the deal in the 1960s was California can temporarily use this extra water, but when Arizona starts using it all, we would have to cut back to our 4.4. Arizona had built the Central Arizona project, but they still hadn't fully utilized it, so they built groundwater basins so they could take all of their water off the river, put it in the groundwater basins, and force California to cut back, which we did in 2002, thanks to the agencies at this table in the state of California. But they have no mechanism of getting that water out, and we've been pushing them as part of your plan. Where is your plan? All that water that you successfully stored underground, what is your plan to get it out? Admittedly, they still don't have that plan. But we're not going to forget that in the negotiations, that there is a lot of water in Arizona. They can withstand certain levels of cutbacks for quite a while and use their in-state resources. So that's something that we're going to have to consider in the discussions.
So the other part of the deal with Arizona is that if there were shortages, they would have to reduce their use to the Central Arizona project, essentially shut it down. And I'm constantly told, don't say that out loud, but that's what the law says. That's the bum part of the deal that's now coming to fruition. That doesn't mean it's an empty pipeline, because we've seen through the partnerships in California that when California had to cut itself back 800,000 feet almost overnight, and the QSA and the California 4.4 plan came into play, that we were able to keep Metropolitan's pipeline full through other people's water or through conservation activities and partnerships. And so, at least from IED's perspective, that will continue to be our mantra. We know that what we need to do is hard because we've been there. And granted, it's really easy to say now, oh, we're all friends. This wasn't how it was 20 years ago, and that's not how we got here. It's really hard. But they're going to have to make those decisions within their state, and they're going to have to create their ag partnerships or their participations with the tribes who do carry not only a lot of clout, but a lot of water rights that have to be resolved. And I think that's going to be super challenging for Arizona, but avoiding it and wanting California to help share in the pain, that's not how they solve their problems. That's sort of avoiding their hard reality, which it's time for that to come into play. And frankly, some of the things we did in the 2007 guidelines, such as ICS, they're great programs, but they actually prevented Arizona from taking shortages since about 2014 and masked the problem. And we need to look at tools that in the future allow for opportunities to build storage, but don't let that water preclude the priority system from coming into play, and folks that have hard realities of reduced supplies in their futures from taking those actions. And Arizona has a real tough process. They have a lot of folks at the table. They have a lot of unresolved tribal issues that they have to similarly work through. But that's on them. We've done the hard thing in California, and I guess nothing brings California together like turning our gaze eastward and saying, hey, Arizona, let us help you help yourself and go on this diet. And you know, it turns out you can do it really fast, because we did. We did not have a soft landing back in the early 2000s, but we figured it out, and it's that accountability, I think, that needs to be put into place.
So I want to go back to one of the things that Robert mentioned, and this was mentioned, we talked a little bit about it at our Southern Cal Water, at our board meeting, excuse me, and it has to do with food production and food production in the U.S. and what that means with whether it's additional fouling or efficiency-based conservation. It seems that, at least in California, with the entitlement water that the ag agencies have, that's where any extra water would come from. I'd like to get Tina and Robert to comment on that. And is there more water that ag can conserve? At what cost? And what does that mean for food production in California and larger scheme of things?
So asking a farming community to fallow a field, when we come up here and see these beautiful golf courses, it's not going to go over very well. I think there's additional efficiencies still to be maintained in all sectors. Certainly ag can always do better, as can urban and MCI. But I like to eat. I think you guys like to eat. I like to go to the grocery store and see full shelves. You don't solve a problem by putting farmers out of business as long as we have front lawns and non-functional turf landscaping. And when you fallow a field, you're not just drying out some grass. That grass is used to feed cattle, to feed horses. It ends up being ice cream and cheese and hamburgers and steaks and all of the things we like to eat. And I don't see a lot of people in California or this nation getting skinnier, but I do see them liking to eat healthier food and go to the grocery store and see the shelves fully stocked. So I think we have to be really cautious about how we squeeze agriculture, because if you put a farmer out of business, you don't just get to turn that on again in 2 years when you realize you screwed it up. Because farmers are generational, they take care of the land, they don't just click a button, and that's why ag conservation is so challenging. It's crop-based. To conserve water, you have to have water to use. So I think we're all about becoming more efficient and using our partnerships with the urban areas and the funding they provide to continue to farm, but using less water. But at a certain point, you hit that threshold where you squeeze the turnip as much as you can, and if you want to continue to eat, you have to prioritize and preserve your food supply. And you can't just look to other countries, because the food supply we have here in the United States is safe, it's reliable, and we've seen wars recently in other countries when you start to interrupt those food chains. So I think you just have to be really cautious that you don't go for the quick fix and say, oh, let's do fallowing. You have to look to the longer term solutions. Sure, you can do temporary incentivized voluntary fallowing on a basis this year and next year, but can you do that for 5 years and 10 years? Not unless y'all want to start getting a little skinnier.
Thanks, Dana. I think the crop production in the Coachella Valley is a little bit different than IED, and as is the case with PBID. So, we do have some pretty high value crops in the Coachella Valley. And I think to Tina's point, she didn't come out and kind of talk about security, national security and food production, but I'll go ahead and say it. I know it's been, I'm not the first one to say it, but I will repeat that. I do think there is some recognition that, you have to have, a stable source of food supply. You can't just simply rely on the cheapest source like Walmart does, and then go shop, the cheapest supplier for your food, because you don't know how stable that is. So, while I think, there are some areas for efficiencies, I do agree. I think the long-term solution is not fallowing. I think, most of the growers we talked in our area, they'd rather farm and actually put something on the table, because, it's not just the food production, but I think there's jobs that are associated with that and quality of life. So I think, the ag community, at least in our area, stands to be partners on, coming up with some solutions. We're looking for, efficiencies and, really, but I think in the end, it really is a free market, free market system where I think the growers are going to grow what, the supply chain dictates. So it's a good question, Dan. I'm not sure what to have, a complete answer for you, but, we do need to be a part of the solution.
All right, just to sort of wrap up where we are at about time, I want to give you guys the opportunity to say anything that may have gone unsaid. But maybe in your response, how can the Southern California Watershed Coalition help this cause? How can they be out and about? How can this membership help you in your negotiations, getting ideas out there in the media, building coalitions, that sort of thing? And I'll start with you, Robert.
Thanks, Dan. I think, social media and messaging to me is, just as important or even more important than the technical issues that we're dealing with. I think it was evidenced by what happened earlier this year that Bill kind of mentioned, where the other states were kind of rallying around or against California. If you didn't really know any better, you would say, hey, all these other states were united, when that really wasn't the case. I think just having an understanding what the issues are, and that I think the three of us here at the table and then others are really fighting very hard to protect the water rights within the state, but in a reasonable manner and being open, because that's how we get things done. We try to stay out of course as much as possible. So I would just urge you to not believe everything that you read in popular media, and go to the people that you trust on these issues.
Yeah, thanks. When we were fighting with the 6 states, what we were telling our constituents and others to get our message out about the tremendous work that California's done. All the efforts here in San Diego County to reduce use, all the efforts in all of Southern California. Metropolitan's demands were 2 million acre-foot for imported water back in 2020, or 2000. Thanks to our member agency stepping up, now it's 1.2 million acre-feet. Ag use is down. Getting the message out that we have invested billions of dollars in our ag programs, billions of dollars here in Southern California to reduce our use. The amount of Colorado River water we're bringing in continues to decline. And so getting that message to Congress, to Sacramento, to the other states is important, because they're going to come after us and say, why shouldn't California do more? You're not taking any shortages. The reality is we've done more than everyone, and we need to get that message out.
Well, the reality is California does have senior water rights, and agreements matter, and laws matter, and contracts matter. I think the other area we need to look to, instead of putting it all on Arizona, is the upper basin. They think that because they haven't fully used their entitlement and they have a hydrologic drought, that's their new phraseology, that they don't need to be involved. But the river's a collective system. Frankly, IID could sit on its water rights and tell everybody else to fix it, but you don't see us doing that because A, we don't have another water supply, or else we might. But that's not how we take care of a resource that keeps ag in production and that allows our families to grow and to prosper along with the state. And we really need to make sure that these upper basin states don't push the burden of solving the river crisis onto the lower basin states. Even though the water goes into their system, they have a responsibility to take the efficiency measures that we've done in California and in the more progressive states. So as much as people love to pick on California, we have super high ag efficiencies and urban efficiencies, and there's a lot of potential in the upper basin, and we need to hold them accountable as well.
All right, well, I think we're at time. Thank you everyone for coming. Thank you to my colleagues for being here. Appreciate it. Appreciate your friendship.
Charlie, just for closing comments, I want to say thank you. Please help me thanking our panelists. This is one of those rare opportunities I get to sit and really listen to what's being said and then kind of take some copious notes as to sort of summarizing what I heard today, because as I want to then phrase it in the context of what we do within the Water Coalition. So really, if you look at the Colorado, it's like looking at the Sacramento Bay Delta. I know LA doesn't like to talk about it. It'll be like imported water from New Orleans Valley and Mono Lake. There are significant stresses on the three principal sources of imported water for Southern California across the board. This is a water, I like to use the phraseology now, a water tapestry, a very tight tapestry that has been woven over a very long period of time. And there's a lot of people, a lot of interest pulling at that tapestry, pulling strands out, trying to find alternatives. And as a tapestry, as you know, comes apart, it all comes apart very quickly. And so part of what I heard today was the need for all of you in this room to be part of the solution, to be able to advance with our congressional delegation, because let's make no mistake about it, California has been somebody's punching bag from outside this area for a long time. One of the great advantages of California is we're really big and really diverse. Disadvantage, we're really big and really diverse. And so keeping a delegation together even though we have the tax base, we have the voting base, but to keep that coalition together and focused on issues like this can be a challenge. And so that's one of the challenges that we're looking to take on. What I want to be able to say for all of you is the value then of, as was touched on, a coalition. And in this room you will see it. We have water experts and water agencies and public agencies. We have cities, we have counties, we have agricultural interests, we have labor interests, we have nonprofit environmental groups that are, I consider to be very responsible in helping us advance this conversation. No single entity does it alone. We do it together collectively. If we don't do it collectively, we will all suffer the consequences as a result. So we look forward to a further dialogue in this, like we do with the Sacramento Delta, like we do with water conservation, stormwater, recycled water, lots of opportunities. There's a lot of dynamic shifting going on within the water community that we're all going to be a part of. We thank you for being part of us today. We thank you for your participation in our program. If you are not formally members of this coalition, you should be. You should be. And how many of you that raised your hand on social media did a posting today? How many of you? Come on, come on. I'm seeing a very absent group back here, Peterson, with you and your friends at that table. We thank you for also posting. Look for us now. What Matters, Water, TV, and Podcast. It is posted. Secretary, Natural Resources, Wade Crowfoot went up Tuesday. Check it, see it, like it, comment. Hey, call me an idiot. Just do something with it. Okay, that's part of our communication channels. We look forward to seeing you at our annual dinner in November the 2nd. We will be, we're going hoi polloi. Yeah, we're going to be at the in Newport Beach. So at the Balboa Bay Club. Make your reservations now. We will sell out. There is no question. So we look forward to seeing you at our next quarterly meeting at the Balboa Bay Club. It'll be really something I think you'll enjoy. So thank you for being with us. Again, thank our panel. We'll see you in November.